Okay, welcome everyone to the Tuesday, October 13th GRCC meeting. And tonight we have our regular cast of characters, but we also have a new student representative, Ellie Davis. It's actually technically your second meeting, but I still consider you new. So welcome back. Um, so tonight we have a special set of guests. We have PT Kevgis and Dan Bechtold to be discussing some information about the Keystone exams. But we're scheduled to have our normal agenda tonight of administrative presentations from Mr. Petiti. But first, let's go through any public comment that's come through.
We do actually. I could read two here. Good evening. I would like to ask that the GRCC start work on a policy around the length of school board director comments during all of its meetings. Many of the board's meetings from June until now have lasted until 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. and later, amounting to hundreds of hours for stakeholders, including parents, to track live or in playback. I think we need to apply the same rules that govern citizen public comment when it comes to director comment per resolution/item up for a vote. Leave it up to the board on how exactly to do this, but I think it is necessary in order to be respectful of everyone's time and to keep the district focused on its first and most important priority, academics and teaching and learning. The last board business meeting was particularly long on comments, each by all 9 members individually, that didn't always seem relevant to the agenda item at hand. Also, in regards to the discussion on Senate Bill 1612, I would like to ask the board to refrain from using the loaded and unhelpful phrase high stakes testing, page 2 on the agenda attachment. I'm also hopeful that board does not encourage and support students opting out of exams, a possibility referenced in the presentation. Testing for content knowledge and student understanding is absolutely vital, especially objective and consistent measures across all schools in the Commonwealth. We cannot support students without accurate assessment of their learning. If we are ever to address this district's wide achievement gap, we must have assessment data. I don't think it is a positive board stance to communicate to students that the rules shouldn't apply to us. And in a time when we are supposed to be focused on equity, disparaging tests and encouraging not taking them seems counterproductive. Thank you for all your hard work, as always.
Mr. Petiti, in public comment, aren't you supposed to be receiving names and addresses?
Oh, I apologize. Yes, that was Gail Morrison, 11 Poplar Avenue. Thank you, Amy. Ms. Coleman.
No problem.
The next comment is from Jamie Foreman, 805 Mainland Road. I'm hoping to receive clarification on how a student can avoid taking the biology and algebra keystones by either accessing Act 158 Pathway 3 or by opting out. If Pathway 3 requires a completed class and a PSAT score of over 970 and a student has done both, does that student then meet our state and RTSD graduation requirements? Is there a form for parents to access Pathway 3? It is also unclear how to opt out of Keystones and ensure a student still meets the graduation requirements. If a student opts out, are there supplemental tests or courses the state or Radnor is enforcing for the graduation requirement? I believe if my student takes the Keystones, his scores may be lower than expected due to his interrupted education during COVID and the length of time since he completed the courses in June 2020. Since the Keystone scores appear on the student's senior transcripts, I'm quite concerned that they could impact college admissions when multiple Radnor students are applying to the same school and their Keystone scores may then be compared. For ACT and SAT scores, families control the submission of scores to colleges. For Keystone scores, I believe our families have no control, as the PDE website states the scores must be on the transcripts. For this reason, I do not want my student taking the Keystones. Thank you for discussing the Keystones, and I look forward to your official directive.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So now we're going to move on to.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
We get a name for that?
Yeah.
Yes, that was Jamie Foreman, 805.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Okay.
Just pretend I didn't say that.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to the approval of minutes. I trust you've all gone over those minutes with a fine-tooth comb and dotted I's, crossed T's, all that good stuff. Thumbs up. Good. Okay. All right, so now we're going to move on to agenda items, and we're going to hand it over to Mr. Petiti.
Thanks, Dr. Babson. So tonight we're going to start with a presentation from our Director of Secondary Education, Secondary Teaching and Learning, Dan Bechtold, and our Radnor High School Principal, Ms. P.T. Kevgis. And they're going to provide some background on state required assessments like the Keystones and the PSSAs, as well as discuss some related legislation. And then we're going to learn a little bit more about and discuss proposed Senate Bill 1216. 1216, which again, the presentation will introduce and we'll elaborate a bit on more later, is currently in the Senate Rules Committee. I spoke with PSBA's Chief Advocacy Officer today, and I was told that it, quote, may sit there for a while, even after the election. So we can share more about, I can share a little more about this conversation after Mr. Bechtold's and Ms. Kev's presentation. But still, we recognize that the Keystones is something that our parents, a good majority or a good amount of them at the high school level at least, want to learn more about. And so we wanted to provide our community this information. So I thank Mr. Bechtold and Ms. Kavgas for joining us and giving some of their time to go over this with us. And I turn it over to them to get started.
Thank you, Mr. Petiti. Thank you, committee, for letting us come and present this evening. I'll go ahead and screen share. All right, so I'm talking a little bit about Senate Bill 1216 and the Keystone Exams and how they're interrelated. So the Keystone and PSSA requirement comes from some legislation at the federal level. So the Every Student Succeeds Act was a federal law that was passed in December of 2017 by the Obama administration, and it was a replacement of what we call as NCLB, or No Child Left Behind, from 2001. Now, both of these and a number of other laws reauthorized the initial ESEA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This was signed into law by President Johnson in 1965, and this was an extensive statute that funds primary and secondary education, things like professional development and materials for instruction. The goal of ESEA and the goals of NCLB and ESSA is to ensure equal access to education by reducing achievement gaps. ESSA specifically provides states flexibility for high stakes testing, and that was one of the key pieces of the ESSA legislation, was putting more flexibility into the state's hands for establishing standardized testing requirements. And so Pennsylvania's law that outlined the flexibility and testing accountability was Act 158 of 2018, and we'll look at that in depth tonight. So when we look at the Keystone and PSSA requirement, there are actually a couple different forms of state standardized tests that Pennsylvania administers to students that are in public education. There's the PASA, the PSSA, and the Keystone Exams. The PASA is an individually administered exam to students who have the most significant cognitive disabilities. It's designed to take a snapshot of the student's performance looking at a small sample of skills that come from the PA academic standards. When we look at the PSSAs, this is administered for math and English in grades 3 through 8 and science in grades 4 and 8. This was also previously administered to high school students. So PSSAs began in 2003 and they continue today for elementary school students and middle school students. High school students stopped taking PSSAs in 2013, and at that time they started taking the Keystone Exams. Keystone Exams are given in 3 different courses or 3 different subjects: Algebra 1, Biology, and Literature. They are course ends. That means that when you complete the Algebra 1 course, you take the Keystone Exam. When you complete Biology, you take the Keystone Exam. Literature is a reading comprehension exam, and that is taken by students in grades 10 typically, or 11 at Radnor High School. So what I put in here is bands for when students, grade bands for when students typically take this in Radnor. Algebra could be anywhere from 6th to 10th grade. Historically, students take this in 8th and 9th grade, the majority of students. Biology, 9th or 10th grade, the majority of students take it in 9th grade. And literature, the majority of students take it in 10th, but they can take it in 10th or 11th. Students earn a score that is broken down into 4 scoring categories. And I've got a screen grab here of the 4 scoring categories along with the score range. So we have below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. The base score is 1200 and the highest score you can get is 1800. 1500 is passing. So below basic and basic are considered not passing, and proficient and advanced are considered passing scores. Students may retake a Keystone exam that they earn below basic or basic on, and students receive detailed score reports after each Keystone exam that they take. So when we look at Keystone Performance, what impact does Keystones have on schools? So there's a couple different things. One of the things that Mrs. Kevgis will get into a little bit is the Act 158 pathway. So Act 158 of 2018 was legislation that modified the way that students could earn a high school diploma and provided alternate pathways for students to do so. This provided a replacement to the project-based assessments that students had to take if they did not show proficiency on a Keystone exam. There are actually 5 pathways under Act 158. Act 82 of 2012 is the revision to the evaluation model for educators. So PDE now has teachers and administrators and that go and get evaluated under Act 82. It's just based on the Danielson rubric specifically for teachers, and anywhere from 15 to 30% of a teacher's evaluation is derived from Keystone Exam Performance. And I will note that we're not talking about non-teaching professionals here. We're not talking about school nurses or school counselors or social workers. We're talking about classroom teachers. And this 15 to 30% is comprised of student performance as well as building level performance. And now this is in a typical year. In the 2019-2020 school year, no Keystone data was able to be used in the evaluations of teachers due to the exams not being given in the spring. But on a typical year, classroom teachers that are not considered non-teaching professionals would get anywhere from 15 to 30% of their evaluation determined by how this school does and how individual students do in their classroom to take the Keystone exams. Additionally, we've got Keystone exams do have an impact on schools in state and national rankings. And so one of the things that schools administrators are keenly aware of is metrics and methodologies for how these type of things are calculated. And I put down there so some of the more popular rankings out there. So great schools, 19% of great schools ranking comes from Keystone Exam Performance. And I would actually put a qualifier there, Keystone Exam and PSSA Performance. Niche, 15% of their evaluations come from this. School Digger, 100% of the School Digger evaluations come from our state standardized tests. And US News and World Report, 50% of their evaluation is determined by how our students perform on state standardized tests, meaning Keystones and PSSAs, which has a direct impact on property values for families that live in the district. All right, so Act 158, Mrs. Kevgis is going to run through some of the aspects of the pathways for Act 158.
Thank you for having me, everyone. It's a nice evening. Mrs. Goldman and Mr. Bechtold, it feels like old times. I think we've gone through how many Keystone presentations over the years? Too many to count, probably. So I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about what we've been doing the past few months, but also the pathways that have been made available through Act 158, and there are 5 total. Pathways 1 and 2 are the most simple. And the ones that, we have been trying to help parents understand are probably the easiest pathway for students to follow. Pathway 1 is simple. It's passing all 3 Keystone exams, whether it's Algebra 1, Biology, or Literature, either with a proficient or an advanced score. Pathway 2 is what we call the composite pathway. So conceivably, a student could not pass one of the Keystone exams, close to passing, but not passing, and earn a super score between all 3 of them. And then that composite score of 4452 allows them to complete the pathway. So again, taking the exams themselves is the most straightforward path. Pathway 3, we now have information about the specific scores that we're looking at. So pathway 3 really looks at the Keystone class that they take at high school, again, whether that's biology, whether that's world literature, or whether that's Algebra 1. But then that's coupled with an approved alternative assessment. And you can see that there's multiple ways of accomplishing that, whether it's an AP exam and getting a 3 or above, a PSAT with a score of 970, an SAT with a score of 1010, ACTs, and others are listed. You can also have acceptance into a 4-year nonprofit institution of higher education. We do not have a list of those schools, but they have identified that as a possibility. If you could move on to the next slide, Mr. Bechtold. Thank you. Pathway 4 is related to students that are in technical school. And so it looks at 2 different exams, the NOCTI exam, the National Occupancy Competency Testing Institute exam, and the National Institute of Metalworking Skills, the NIMS assessment. And that is, again, a specific pathway for our students in technical school. Pathway number 5 mirrors pathway 3 slightly, but it looks at more of a post-secondary readiness. So again, the student would have to pass the Keystone class and demonstrate, however, post-secondary readiness through different pieces of evidence. And they ask that the student has multiple pieces of those, 3 specifically from a career portfolio. Some of those examples are listed below. They could be SAT subjects tests and the specific score is tied to that test. It could be in a dual enrollment course like we have at the high school for linear algebra. It could be higher education acceptance, community service project, or completion of an internship, externship, or a co-op opportunity. Mr. Bechtold, could you go on to the next slide? Thank you. So as Mr. Bechtold mentioned before, in the spring of 2020, due to the pandemic, the Keystone exams were not administered. The state moved back the window, both for the spring and the summer testing window, to this September, and the window was for September 28th through October 16th. And they actually extended that window. Initially, it was only through October 3rd. So again, they pushed back that spring and summer window to the past couple of weeks. Students were not required to take the exam. However, in not having the Keystones in the spring, they didn't ease up their requirements for the graduation pathways under Act 158. So again, our stance was to encourage the students to take it, as those first 2 pathways are the easiest to accomplish. If you go on to that last slide, thank you. And then finally, the biology Keystone was the one that we prioritized for a number of reasons. So we prioritized biology because if you look at the sequence of courses at the high school, we go from biology freshman year for most students to chemistry and then to physics. If you look at the curriculum in either chemistry or in physics, there is very, if any, biology. I mean, there's a smidge in chemistry at the beginning when you look at organic pieces, but beyond that, really nothing. And so our concern was the retention of the material. The further and further away that the students got from the course, the less and less the retention would be. For students at the middle school who took Algebra 1 last year, those are really our top math students. And so they really don't have any other exams that are competing for that time during that testing window. So we felt confident that they could take it. And they actually are taking it tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday, tomorrow and Thursday. As far as the other 2 courses that the Keystone tests take place in, world literature and Algebra 1, it's very different than with biology. When you take geometry at the high school, geometry is very integrated with algebra. And so students are consistently reviewing those skills over the course of the semester and the year. And so, the skills that they would require or are required to know for the Keystone exam are being, reviewed constantly and are fresh in their minds. And so we would feel that they would be best testing in December, or at the very latest in May. The literature Keystone is exactly, what Mr. Bechtold had said at the beginning. It's a reading comprehension exam. And so that's a skill that you build all through high school, whether you're in 9th grade, 10th grade, or 11th grade. And so those skills continue as well, which makes sense to, let the kids wait until the end of the year at the December window.
All right, so when we look at Senate Bill 1216, some of the aspects of this is that parents can opt their children out of state standardized assessments. And this proposed legislation also postpones the implementation of Act 158 graduation requirements to the 2022-2023 school year. I will say that even with this legislation, if it passes, when you look at 2022-2023, that means that sophomores and below, so anybody in 10th grade, 9th grade, 8th grade, et cetera, are still held to the Act 158 pathways. And so when we looked at what the current Act 158 requires and looked at Senate Bill 1216, looking at Senate Bill 1216, when you look at it closely, this doesn't do anything as far as postponing implementation of Act 158 for students in 10th grade or below. Senate Bill 1216 also requires PDE to waive the accountability requirements if the federal government allows them to do so. If the US DOE says that they can do that, then it requires PDE to seek a federal waiver. And then it also requires districts to provide transportation to non-pubs. So any local private schools within boundaries of the school districts are required to provide transportation to the non-public schools. One of the COVID-related aspects of Senate Bill 1216 is that notice needs to be provided to schools if you have students, employees, or contractors that come up positive or presumptive positive. This notice is within 24 hours of the PA Department of Health or any local board or Department of Health getting that information. And then the school has the requirement to, within 24 hours, notify anyone that works with that individual, receives instruction with them, volunteers with them, et cetera, to provide notice that they have been in contact with someone that is positive or presumptive positive. This also extends the deadline for paraeducators to complete staff development. So every year, paraeducators are required to complete training, and this extends the deadline in the event that they were unable to complete the required training due to COVID. And it also waives performance data and evaluations of professional employees. So we talked in the beginning about the 15 to 30%. So this would essentially temporarily waive the Keystone percentages in the teachers' evaluations. So Mrs. Kevkes talked about NIMS and NOCTI. So this allows the Pennsylvania Secretary of Education to waive the NIMS and NOCTI exam requirements if you have a CTE or CTC, formerly what we used to call VOTEC, and now they're called Career and Technical Centers. If our CTCs are unable to stay open due to COVID and they cannot administer the NIMS and the NOCTI exams, then the Secretary of Education can, for a specific CTC, waive the requirement that students take those. And it also relaxes the certification requirements for teachers. So it allows for temporary certificates to be issued for candidates who were unable to take their praxis assessment due to COVID. It provides exceptions for teachers who were had a level 1, which is a temporary teaching certificate, and they were supposed to move to level 2, but because of COVID, they could not. And it also allows for teachers that should have had their certificate issued, but were unable to take the practicing exam to take it. There are a lot of different aspects of this bill. Keystones are one specific part of it, but all of these are steps and responses to COVID-19's disruption from spring and summer. And so it's kind of a far-reaching education bill that has a lot of different arms to it. And that is an overview of Senate Bill 1216 and the possible impact on the Keystone exams.
Okay, great. How about we take a quick break from the agenda, Mike, to open it up to questions and comments from the board. Mr. Jubileer, would you like to ask a few questions?
Thank you, Chairman. A couple quick questions and can I make some comments as well? Or I could hold off on comments maybe.
Comments and questions are.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. This could be for either Ms. Kefkis or Mr. Bechtold. Give and take, do we know at Radnor any percentages or ranges of students who fit into the different graduation pathways? I know it's heavy on number one, which is just past the Keystones. Do we have any sense of other percentages in our district of students who afford themselves of the other pathways?
That's a great question, Mr. Jubileer. We actually spent a good deal of time this summer taking a look at all the students that have already taken the Keystone exams and creating a master list. Mr. Bruderball did a wonderful job of pulling all that information together. So we have snapshots for every student of what Keystones they've taken, what scores they've received, whether or not they've passed, whether or not they can receive complete pathway 2 with a composite score. We also have, list of their course grades to see whether or not they've passed those Keystone courses. So we have a whole, master list of all this information put together. And then it'll be looking at that list for each individual student with the counselor to see what pathway makes the most sense. Again, pathway 1 and 2 are the pathway that is the quickest and hopefully the easiest to accomplish what we need to for that graduation requirement. But we do have other pathways available, and we'll be, looking at every student individually to see which one suits them best.
So it sounds like not that there's a number in the aggregate, clearly number 1 and number 2 are extremely on the high end, whatever that is in the aggregate.
Yes, our students for the most part do very,
makes
very
sense.
well in Keystone Exams.
Yeah, and it shows. It's your credit and everyone else's. Quick clarification. I thought this don't we provide transportation to private school students anyway? Like, I don't really understand. I'm looking at Mrs. Goldman's smirk. And I'm confused. Isn't that a state law, or am I off, Mrs. Goldman and Chairman Babson? I thought that was what we do.
So some this is in response to some school districts who have voted recently to cut that.
Get it? I get it. I know we don't have a solicitor here in this meeting, but someone who's of a political background, this bill, this is a comment, so sort of strikes me as violating the single subject rule. But that's an editorial comment. Anecdotally, Mrs. Kefkis or Mr. Bechtold, do you know what maybe some of our neighboring school districts, I don't want to say have done, but have they also been engaged in having the Keystones going on as we speak at this time frame, give and take, or is it all over the place?
My sense from, speaking with the Central League principals is it's really a mix of everything. Some are administering it, some are delaying it till December. So it's really.
But they're administering it for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to pass the baton. I want to save, I think we might have some more robust discussion, but others have questions. I'd like to let them have an opportunity to do that.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore.
I'd just like to know, does the administration have any recommendation as to, for us, as to what they find helpful and unhelpful in this bill? As I sit here, I see some things in it that look good, some things that look problematic. What's your opinion?
I could take that. Leads me to the conversation I had today with Mr. Callahan, the Chief Advocacy Officer over at the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, PSPA. And he had a similar take on it, Mr. Moore. He actually called it, quote, "the bill is just okay." He said that they're not enthused about some of the provisions, such as the opt-out provision. He mentioned that they are in a way not entirely supportive of the provision that would prohibit Keystones used on the local level, because some districts, they rely on those as their end of year graduation requirements voluntarily. They choose to use those exams. So they had issues with that. He said that, even if there was the waiver even if it went through and the Keystones were able to be waived, the state would have to apply to the federal level to get those waived. And the boss has been on record, according to Mr. Callahan, saying that the waiver wouldn't be granted. So it's possible to be a non-starter, even if the bill went through, that the PDE wouldn't be able to get that approval at the federal level. So at the end of the day, it was a quote, "leadership isn't sure what to do with this bill." We're presenting it tonight because we know, again, that Keystones are a topic of great interest to a good majority of our high school population. And we want to just empower the public and the community that if they see something in this bill, in that a provision that they either want to advocate for or against, that they can see that that's a possibility if they'd like. So really, it's kind of our thrust for this evening's presentation.
Advocate to their to their state and federal representatives, correct, Mr. Petiti?
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Yes.
And I think I understand the provision about transportation, and I appreciate Mr. Jubilier's clarification, because we do already engage in transportation for non-public schools, and that was an agenda item at a previous board meeting, our bus routes to do that. But help us all, if the COVID cases start to get worse to a point where our superintendent recommends a transition from the hybrid plan to the remote plan again, to phase 3, would we still be on the hook to have our transportation employees busing non-public school students who do not go to the equivalent of phase 3 for them? That's something that set off some red flags for me as a safety issue for our employees and for the community as a whole.
And you're referencing here, Mr. Moore, the final little paragraph, kind of at the end of the proposed bill, that will require school districts to provide non-public school transportation for the 2021 school year if such transportation was provided during the previous school year. Is that
yes?
Right.
Yes, that's right.
So we didn't actually get into that subject, and I totally can grasp and understand your concern there. I think that falls under the category of why the bill to them is just okay.
All right, that's fair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I didn't have any other questions, Dr. Babson. That's all for now.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Goldman.
Mr. Batchelor, you look like, were you reaching for your unmute button? I don't want to step on your toes if you wanted to say something.
No, I'm fine. No, Michael answered that well. Just the reality is that bill on the busing has everything to do with COVID and when schools go virtual, and individual schools had to make a decision what they were doing with their public school, with their private school runs. We did bus at the beginning of the school year. And this bill will obviously have an impact if we go to phase 3, as Mr. Moore asked. It would, what we did by choice, we would now be, potentially forced to do.
Right, and as that bill came around, a bunch of us school directors from around the region actually did a little checking, and almost every school district in the shoulder counties of Philadelphia was already planning to continue to bus non-public students. For some reason, that message didn't make its way to the non-public families or to their corresponding legislators. So there was a lot of time and energy spent on putting this provision into the bill when in fact, most of us were doing it anyway as a service to our community. So, but it's still part of the bill. It hasn't gone through.
Right. And And again, we did it because, you know, we have an obligation to do that, and a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize that in Pennsylvania, public school districts do provide transportation to the families, to the kids who decide to, you know, attend a private school and that are not attending the public schools. So we do that normally, and we continued with that practice. We also continued with it because we had, you know, even though we were beginning the year virtually, we had plans to reassess within 2 weeks of the school year, that we you know, were hopeful that we were looking at a situation where we'd be bringing our students in hybrid. So you know, we felt it was the right thing to do at the time, knowing that we were looking to reassess that situation quickly.
Yeah, because when we don't provide it to our own students, the law does not require us to do it.
Correct. Correct. It's what
Right.
we provide for our students is what we have to provide for the private schools.
Right. Okay, well, Dr. Babson, do you want me to proceed with questions?
Yeah,
at this
please
point?
do.
Okay.
Thanks.
So thank you, Mr. Bechtold and Ms. Kevkis. Yes, we have been talking about Keystones for, I don't know, I mean, my daughter's 21, so 7 years, 8 years, something like that. It's crazy that we're still having these conversations, but I think because there was the waiver granted by the US Department of Education last year and followed through by PDE, maybe it's come up as a little bit of a surprise all of a sudden to hear the word Keystones as we're coming back to school after a pass on them for the spring. So just as part of your presentation, I just wanted to reinforce the fact that on page 2, I'll call it page 2 of the presentation, the Keystone PSSA requirement, that Pennsylvania's assessment models that you were really well describing, the PASA, the PSSA, and the Keystone, all are in place to satisfy federal testing requirements. Those are not discretionary for Pennsylvania. They're not really they're certainly not discretionary for school districts. Those exams are in place to satisfy federal US Department of Education testing requirements for all school districts in the United States. So that's what those are for. Because I think some people have asked, well, why is our district opting to have Keystone exams? It's because we have to satisfy a federal testing requirement. Please feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm misstating anything. But I just want to be clear that this is not a discretionary Radnor Township School District test. This is satisfying a federal requirement, which was waived last year, but has not been waived for this school year. The question I wanted to ask on the next page where it says Keystone exam impact on schools. How does for ACTA 82, how does the 15 to 30% of a teacher's evaluation from Keystones compare to the role it plays for teachers who are administering PSSAs? Is it the same, 15 to 30%? And that there was talk about that changing. Has that changed over time, that percentage? It's gone down, I think. Didn't it used to account for more?
So they, there was, it really depends. There's a bunch of different nuances in there, Mrs. Goldman. So it depends. Again, I touched on non-teaching professional. There are, if you are a teacher that teaches a Keystone area, then you get a larger percentage. So if you're a teacher that teaches biology, you would get 15% for your students' performance that you teach, and then you would get 15% for approximately 15% for the school score, which is based off of how the students holistically in the building performed on the Keystones. There was discussion about shifting the evaluation model. One of the things that was legislation out there that the state was looking at was eliminating what we have called a student learning objective, or SLO, and taking that 20% away and putting that on the Danielson side, the teacher observation and practice side of the 4 domains of Danielson. And so instead of making that 50%, that would be 70% of a teacher's evaluation. Last year, as I said, at the end of last year, because no Keystones or PSSAs were given, 100% of a teacher's evaluation for all teachers was based off of the 4 domains of Danielson. I hope that answered.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to make you go down that rabbit hole, but I get that it's complex. And I guess what you illuminated for me is the fact that the building score probably accounts for the non-Keystone teaching teacher, the impact that Keystones would have on the evaluation for that teacher. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's correct. So if you are a world language teacher or a technology teacher, you still have at least 15% of your evaluation that comes from how the students in biology, algebra, and literature do, even though you're not teaching them. So it's a portion of the building score.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. Okay. The graduation pathways. I know that those stinky, for lack of a better word I can think of at this hour, project-based assessments have gone away. Are kids still retaking a Keystone if they don't pass, or are they being diverted to another pathway typically? What is the high school doing with that?
So they can.
Go ahead.
Mrs. Kevgis, would you like to jump in?
No, go ahead, Mr. Bechtold.
I was going to say, so they can retake the Keystone exam if they score a basic or below basic. They also, the state kept the door open for districts if they wanted to use project-based assessments as a criteria for one of the pathways. I believe pathway 3 or 5, that you could use that as a criteria if you set it as a local criteria. We have not used PBAs since they went out, but Mrs. Kevgis could probably speak a little more about what they are actually doing.
So we offer for the students to take it a second time, and we will schedule them. At that point, it's really up to them whether they want to follow through with that. And again, that really goes back to what I was saying to Mr. Jubilier, that it comes, with these new pathways to a counseling perspective to really see what the best pathway for each student is, because it's really going to be different for every single one. So there's no clear-cut answer other than for them to try the exams and see how they do, and then we move forward from there.
And you're not running the remediation classes anymore, correct?
No, we are not. No. However,
Okay.
we have said to parents that, if they are preparing for the Keystone exams for December for Algebra 1 and for World Literature, and even for biology, those that have put it off until then, we are using the after-school tutoring program, the ELP, as a source of review for those students. One of our tutors, Ms. Andrulovich, teaches biology currently and has taught it at all the different levels. And so she understands the Keystone content very well, and that way the students could get remediation through that, means.
I mean, if they can get remediation, can they get prep before taking it, or that's a whole different conversation?
We have prep packets for them. We have a lot of review stuff on the website itself, on the Keystone webpage, so they can use that in concert with what they would do, with the actual tutor.
Okay, so yeah, so if a student's feeling anxious about this gap between having completed biology maybe and taking it, there is some kind of prep that they can arrange through the high school to help them get ready for the exam.
And one of the other things that I would say is that, as the students move on in courses, especially in a world language course, it's sophomore year and then they move into American Lit their junior year, the teachers make a really, strong point of spending time in class prepping for other standardized tests like the SATs or the ACTs, and they have those warm-ups or bell ringers or whatever you want to call it, where they spend time during class hitting content like that would not only hit SATs and other standardized tests, but would also be applicable to the Keystone. So there's that in place as well.
And how about, I'm trying to think of what the name of the course is that, for example, the class that Mr. Frost teaches, it's a learning support class. Why am I spacing?
ASC, academic.
What is it called again?
Academic Success Center, or
right.
ASC.
And you can get some support in there as well.
They can certainly review in those courses.
Okay, okay. And that was a good segue, actually, Ms. Kevkis, because I was surprised to see in Pathway 3 that in addition to passing the Keystone class, what the approved alternate assessments are. So in addition, if you don't pass the exam, but you pass the corresponding course, you can get an SAT score of 1010 and still meet the graduation requirement without having passed the Keystone for the course.
That is correct. My only struggle with that is that I think when they created these pathways, with the exception of maybe pathway 5, where it looks at an internship or some kind of co-op, I don't think that we're really engaging those students that struggle on the exams. And I think that that's always been the case with these tests, that we have incredibly high performing students at Radnor, but we also have students that really struggle at Radnor. And I don't think that, these pathways really do a good job addressing that overall.
Right. And the other pathway that I guess you need also is acceptance into a 4-year nonprofit of higher education. You might not be going that route.
Correct.
So yes, well, we won't go there, but I've always been concerned about these. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that we put in there that was carefully placed in the presentation was the years that students take these exams. If you look, these exams start anywhere, if we're talking algebra, 6th grade, we're looking at 9th grade or 10th grade for biology. We're talking 10th grade, most students for literature. So if you're looking at the pathways and you're banking on your children not taking the Keystone exams, and you're looking at pathway 3, 4, or 5, you're really not going to have them have the opportunity to see where they're going to be until they're a junior or a senior. So really, like looking at taking the SATs, if you elect to opt your child out of taking Algebra 1 exam in 7th or 8th grade, you're really taking away 40% of the pathways from your child when they're in middle school.
Right. And for children who struggle with test taking, which sometimes is why kids won't pass a Keystone, basically the pathway is providing alternatives for more tests. So if you're not a good test taker, it can be a conundrum. Totally. We've talked about that for a long time. Pathway 5, I just had a question on. And first of all, who's keeping track of all these artifacts? You mentioned that the school counselors are starting to do some of that, but pathway 5 is pretty cumbersome. I mean, that's a lot for a counselor to keep track of. Would you agree?
Actually, Mr. Booterball is in charge of keeping track of it, and he works with the counselors. So he has all the information locked away.
Okay. And for pathway 5, the SAT subject test, can you take more than one of those to add up to 3 if you were going to go that route?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
I guess that would come back to your previous comment about, we've got the Keystone exams, and we have historically done a very good job as Radnor preparing students to be successful. And even before we had Act 158, we were able to get students over the hump, either through passing the Keystone exam or the project-based assessment. Expecting a student's not going to earn at least a super score through pathway 2, but then they're going to come back and pass 3 of the subject specifics is, I would say, highly unlikely.
And I don't think most colleges require 3 SAT subject tests. They only require 2. So it's so incongruous that someone who's struggling to pass this test would then need to do all of these other things that a student who has an easier time with that would more readily do. So I've always thought that pathway sort of didn't make sense, but thank you for answering those questions. Another question I have is that I've heard, I'm under the impression that the outcome of your Keystone exam does go onto the transcript. That's required by law. Is that your understanding as well? I mean, has anything about that changed?
I do not believe that has changed, but I could look into that. My understanding is that Radnor has put it on the transcripts. It has been on there. And that's something that I cannot speak 100% to, Mrs. Goldman. I believe that we are required to do it.
And if you put it on, you don't put the actual score or score category. Do you put either pass or fail? And I imagine you wouldn't put fail. I mean, when do you put it on in case somebody's worried about that going on the transcript, saying that going on the transcript? How does that work?
So we have historically put it on after the students graduate. So their transcript will state their performance after they've graduated.
Meaning after they may have applied to and been accepted to college?
Correct.
So
Their
then
transcript will contain their Keystone Performance after they have graduated from Radnor.
and by performance, is that the score or is that the category or is it simply a pass or fail?
We put the highest level of proficiency. So
So
proficient.
either
advanced.
proficient, advanced. Okay, gotcha.
And for below basic or basic, we put not yet proficient. We do not put below basic or basic.
Well, that's,
If I could, sorry, but if I could just chime in real quick, we probably have to move things along, but I just wanted to follow up on something that Amy was saying, which is that I think first of all, I think this presentation is fantastic, and I think we're doing a real public service by going over this information again. I know it kind of comes in waves, as has been said, but I think especially right now, given COVID and how it's shifting things around a bit, given the Senate bill or proposed Senate bill, I think this has been really fantastic and very welcome. I was actually going to ask about pathways, but I think we've covered it really well. I think it's an important part of this whole conversation. I think a lot of parents might not be that aware that there are different pathways. So I think that's a real, a very important point. I'd like to turn it back over to Michael and just thank Mr. Bechtold and Mrs. Kevkis for their time and their wisdom and their caring and all their hard work. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank
Can I
you.
just say one more thing real quick? Thank you, Dr. Babs, for moving us along as well. I just will say for my own volition, if no one else's, I find this bill problematic, and I know there's good and bad, but the COVID requirements as well. I think Mr. Batchelor, we've been many districts are working closely with the local health department regarding notification. This seems to me to be no local control. This is state control of how we communicate, which is very problematic in my opinion. Doesn't mean that the community has to agree. I just wanted to get that on the record as another problematic piece of this legislation as it relates to requirements for notifying the community for one single case, which could also be presumptive, which is frankly a little, well, I think that's a very difficult place to put districts in. Thank you.
so
Okay.
Dr. Babson, just for clarity, because I had another question and I assume you
Oh,
want to
sure.
move along and I'll hold that. No, it's okay.
I was just
But,
looking at the time. Yeah.
I got it. But
Okay.
do you want to have a conversation about, I mean, I'll leave it to Mr. Petiti, but were you asking us for feedback on this bill? Or is that part of the next conversation that Mr. Petiti is going to launch?
If there's other conversation that you wanted to have about the bill itself, next up on the agenda, we're talking about PSBA. I think there's maybe some room in that agenda item to discuss that a bit. I'm just in the interest of time.
I would like to put out there before you move on to the PSBA one thing, because I think
Sure.
it's important. There are a lot of parents who have concerns, or no, I don't want to say a lot. I shouldn't characterize that way. Clearly, there are some, we've
Yeah.
heard from them, who have concerns about the Keystone exams, which is beyond Radnor Township School District's control. I think we've established that. Unfortunately, this is a federal requirement. The state has no way to opt out of it because the feds have signaled they're not willing to opt out of it. So we're stuck at this point. However, parents as taxpayers can write to their state and federal officials and tell them exactly what they think of the Keystone of the testing requirement. The best thing to do is to reach out first and foremost to your state representative, your state senator. If anybody wants to do something like that in the interest of time, perhaps they could, send a message. I don't know. I don't want to presume anything here to Mr. Petiti. We can give them directions on who they should contact to write about this. If there are things about the Keystones and specifically the provisions in 1216 that they'd like to express their opinion on, they have every right to do that, and they should do that if they feel strongly about a piece of legislation or some sort of state or federal initiative that they don't agree with. So I just wanted to put it out there that there are places to go and their voices should be heard. And it's important for us to help them, I think, channel those questions and concerns to the right places. So would that be reasonable if somebody has a question to reach out to GRCC to get direction on how to best advocate at the state or federal level?
Certainly.
Okay.
Yep. And by the way, just the PD website has a nice page called Keystone Exams Waiver Impacts on LEA Practices. It's a nice page full of links, full of information that can be kind of a jumping point for those who are interested in delving into this further. Okay, Mr. Battiti, over to you.
Right. Thank you. I don't want to shortchange the PSBA update. So before we move into the last agenda item, so if we did talk about Mr. Moore, Ms. Goldman mentioning something about PSBA Advocacy Day, which was October 8th, and the Equity Summit, which is happening today, as we've heard, and I think happening right now, which Ms. Goldman and Mr. Moore are attending. So if you wanted to touch a little bit on what's going on or what happened at the Advocacy Day, I wanted to give you the opportunity to do that. If not, we just mention it and we move on to the next subject.
So just to jump in here, this has been a very busy time for PSBA. So, and we've been announcing these events now for a couple of months. So last week there was the Fall Virtual Advocacy Day. Today there is the Equity Summit. And I believe Ms. Goldman and Mr. Moore were able to participate in that. Tomorrow and Thursday is the annual School Leadership Conference, which I actually have been participating in that for a few years and kind of missing it. It's usually a great event, very informative and fun to connect with people. And usually part of that is the Delegate Assembly. It's usually right after, but this year they're having it virtually on November 7th. So just a lot of things going on. Were there any ideas or feedback or any kind of impressions from the events that Amy, Brad, you guys wanted to share? And again, if not, that's fine.
I'll defer to Bradley.
I'll make two comments about the Equity Summit. Two things that really made an impression on me. One was there was a student panel at the beginning of the presentation, which, I mean, we always love hearing from our students, and this was students statewide were able to chime in about their experiences with equity in their school districts. And there was a student that said that in her mind, she didn't feel like her school district had done much in response to the death of George Floyd and the renewed vigor of protests for racial justice that followed from that. And I just want to say that can't be Radnor. We can't have that be what someone says about Radnor. And I know that's probably a topic more for the curriculum committee and the DEI initiative that's underway, but we need to put the wind in the sails of that initiative and continue to do the best we can when it comes to equity. And so, looking back on this year and future years, I hope that our students will look back and say, it's incredible everything that Radnor did to tackle these challenging issues and bring everyone together. I'll leave it at that. That's my reflection on the conference.
That's awesome. And earlier in the summer, I had the privilege and pleasure to be part of some events along these lines with PSBA. And we had basically the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion of PSBA, Heather Bennett, talk to us as a board. And this is something that we are going to be devoted to for the long haul, and watch this space for more of our work on that going forward. I'd like to open up the floor to Ellie. Ellie, if you wouldn't mind maybe chiming in on this topic, or actually even the Keystones. I just want to give you some time to chime in.
Yeah, thank you. No substantial comments on the topic of Keystones. I'm looking forward to taking the literature Keystone this this December. And on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I agree with Mr. Moore. It's important to be able to look at Radnor and say that Radnor made lasting changes during this time with the greater demand for racial justice. And I understand that, the changes that really need to happen, Mr. Moore mentioned, curriculum, those are longer changes that are going to extend past the cycle of protests. So even after, protests die down, there might not be as much media attention. It's the issue of curriculum that I think is gonna have to be a lasting focus. Also, something that I have kept in mind in Radnor is diversity of teachers. I know other students have brought up that issue as well. In my time at Radnor Township School District, 11, 12 years now, I've never had a Black teacher, and I've had a very limited number of teachers of color. So just having the look of the school, the teachers not having that diversity of perspective, I know that's been a concern of myself and fellow students, and that along with the curriculum, I understand is a very sort of long road to making those transitions.
Thank you. That's great. Amy, did you want to chime in as well about today's events?
No, actually, I think Mr. Moore caught the beginning. I caught the morning. I caught more of the afternoon. I jumped into one of the education sessions where we were discussing, I have the title of it right here. Forget off the top of my head. It was culturally responsive family, school, and community engagement. And they had a woman from the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium. I think Dr. Stevenson, as our equity DEI point person, has worked with MACE, MAEC in what he's doing. So that was interesting to hear that. And then I also listened this afternoon to another session on embedding equity into district policy and culture. And it was interesting because the Cheltenham School District has went on an 18-month plus journey to create an equity policy. And they were describing what that process was like for their district. It's interesting. I was surprised. The one surprise I did have is that the last time I heard, which didn't seem that long ago, there were only 5 school districts out of 500 in Pennsylvania that actually had equity policies. They're now up to about 18 school districts in a very short period of time. So a lot of them had 2020 as the date that went into effect. So that was, that was good to hear. And that, and then of course I had to jump off and do school board meetings, but it was nice to participate, and there seemed like there were a large number of participants. In terms of Advocacy Day, Mr. Moore, do you want to give your reflection quickly on that, or?
Well, this bill and others were on the topic. Charter school funding continues to be a major issue for schools statewide. So that was probably the headline for our advocacy. And we spent some time about other COVID-related issues in terms of funding and mandate relief. I think the previous Advocacy Day brought up those issues as well. They continue to be a priority.
And logistically, if I may, I'll just add that the virtual setting has really helped increase engagement because you don't have to travel to Harrisburg. You don't have to chase legislators around the Capitol building and wait for some of them, 50
Right.
minutes to get your appointment.
Right.
So they show up on time. We're able to bring together, I think we had 8 or 9 different school districts on a multi-senator call. So it really, there's something about doing Advocacy Day virtually that I think is really impactful. And regardless, whenever we go back to in-person functioning again, I think there might be some component of the virtual approach that will stay. The conversations have become really robust and personal, and I think it's been one small sliver of a silver lining to the what's happened as a result of COVID.
Thanks for sharing that, Amy. It kind of brings back memories of seems like forever ago that we would go to the Capitol and lobby and meet representatives and such. So but it's
And
good.
get
Like,
lost and get lost in the rain, but that's okay.
right? Yeah, right.
They don't like to be there anyway. They're in 3 session days this month before the election, so I agree with you. They don't want to work too hard.
And Dr. Babson, Mrs. Goldman reminded me of one other
Sure.
concept from the Equity Day that really made a big impression on me. That session with the Cheltenham School District talking about their process of creating an equity policy for the district. Somebody asked them in that session, did you get any pushback? Did you get any pushback when you were trying to create an equity policy? And the answer was yes, there was some pushback. But the pushback was a result of, in large part, as this board member who answered, misunderstanding and issues with communication. So I think that's something for us all to think about, to the extent we move forward with equity initiatives.
Absolutely.
And that board member made a comment that people often think about what they perceive as being taken away from them, instead of thinking about how equity enriches the experience for everyone. And I have background as with connections with this community of parents who advocate on behalf of those receiving special education services. And there's an analogy there that reminded me of that. The idea that when all students are included, everyone benefits,
Right.
and when all so whatever we can do to help with that moving forward, I think is something to bear in mind. It is, and that's why it's an appropriate issue for this committee. Thinking about our communications vision. How do we figure out how to make sure everyone feels included and also bring along the community as a whole to achieve whatever we need to with equity?
Yeah, that's very well said. Hard to say it better.
It's a
And
fantastic segue too, Bradley.
Yeah.
If you wanted to get there tonight. Am I interrupting you, Dr. Babson?
No, not at all.
Move us
No.
if you're
Volley and serve. Go for it.
all right. So yeah, moving on to the last agenda item. It's going to be a brief one, and that is to provide a slight introduction to the Rebranding Radnor plan, and is that why I said it as a segue from Mr. Moore was that the plan that we are creating and that we're going to bring forward on October 27th at our school board meeting is going to be intentional around bringing people together and hearing viewpoints and creating something that, as I think the students have already copyrighted, that allows us to reimagine our future and respect the past. So all this is because, as we know, the board voted on September 2nd to retire the Radnor's name and associated imagery. So what we're doing is we're creating a plan to identify and remove the instances of the logo and the name throughout the district. We are looking at how we would go about selecting and launching a new Radnor brand, and then while simultaneously creating that way to respect the past in a concrete way in the school. So we're bringing this plan and this process through the Government Relations and Communications Committee. So we'll all be working on this through the next several months, and we will be, this allows us to make sure that there's public updates and discussion regularly happening. Again, I'm going to get more into this on the 27th, but just so everyone knows, the plan is going to be broken up into 5 different phases. We're going to have a discovery phase, a messaging phase, a design phase, a documentation phase, and a launch phase. And these will overlap, but in the current state we are in, we're discovering. We're looking at taking an inventory, again, of where these instances are, and then removing them as is feasible. We've already taken some steps to remove and identify some of the logos and names, and scheduled steps are in place to continue that. Also part of the discovery phase and what we've already done so far, and I can thank Ms. Kevkis and Mr. Bechtold for participating, is we met as a core administrative team, and we looked at how we're planning this and how we're going to do a timeline to make this happen and make sure that all stakeholders are brought in to share their perspectives and to see the process and to help with the design, including students, of course. We're looking at reaching out to those stakeholders. So we've already made some direct contacts to those that we have heard from over the past several months in communications to the board and in communications directly to the district, who are passionate about this issue and have a vested interest in it. Whether it's a for or against, we want to make sure that there's a place and to express themselves and to feel that there's going to be a role for them as we move throughout this whole rebranding process. So those emails and outreach has taken place to those groups, and we'll be keeping them informed and making sure they're involved as we move forward. And also, as I mentioned, we've been thinking about the long-term goals as they connect to the infrastructure project, of course, and other district projects that may impact the rolling out and the implementation of our new brand. So this will impact other areas, and we want to identify those areas and how we are working on other projects in the district and how we could combine those efforts and have that consistent kind of work, so we're not working in silos. We're going to make sure that happens too. So I look forward to offering more information, more detailed information, including some draft timelines in a couple of weeks. And that's the long and short of it.
Excellent. So I think we could have some discussion, or we could maybe just take that point of information from Michael and move forward. But maybe just a brief comment. Michael, I'll kind of hand it back over to you here in a second. Unless do we have people? Do we have members? Would you like to comment on this particular issue, or how about that? Let's start with that. Jeff, any comment?
No, I appreciate it. I don't have anything further to add at this point.
Right.
I'm just glad to hear that what I was hoping to hear, and I heard loud and clear, that we are bringing in all voices.
Mhm.
This is an issue and a matter of great emotion for many
Mhm.
people, and that constituencies from students to alum to community and others will be invited to participate.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Great point. Mr. Moore, anything?
I don't know what the public was expecting with this agenda item. I mean, if anyone wants to go back and look at our previous decision on September 2nd, all that discussion happened starting at 13:35 in that meeting. So that's not what this was about.
Mhm.
It's at the end of that meeting. I think it was certainly the sense of the board that we give the administration time and space to figure out how to implement the retirement of the Raider name and the imagery, and as the administration requested, everything else is going on. So
Mhm.
it's good to hear that the administration is being thoughtful about that and using that time wisely, and we're very thankful for your work implementing that board.
Absolutely. Amy, any comments?
I'm good. I think Ellie
Okay.
had her hand up though.
Yes, absolutely. Ellie.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Mr. Petiti said, that, there needs to be a tone of positivity looking forward when carrying out this school board decision. And, there are students who feel like they have lost something with the decision to retire the Raider name and logo, and those feelings are completely valid. But just to reiterate what Mr. Petiti said, it's important that those students in particular feel like they have a sense of agency when this decision is being made. It's important that they don't feel like this is a decision that's happening up with the school board that they don't have any say in. So just the sense of agency students need to have throughout this process.
Great point. And I think we can all get behind that, especially in these challenging times, I think it's important for us to come together as a community. And I think there's a theme here of looking at what we are gaining by going in this direction with this particular issue, but also other issues, looking at how we are getting better, improving, and having a more positive spin on it. Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, so that was the last agenda item. So I think I appreciate Ellie, your comments, and take them to heart, and everyone else, and we will certainly pursue outreach to everyone, and we welcome everyone to lend a voice and their thoughts. So back to you, Dr. Bax.
Great. Okay, excellent. All right, so now we're going to move to new business. Any new business? Okay. All right, now we're going to move to public comment. Any additional public comment?
Nope.
Okay, how about a motion to adjourn? Okay, we've got Mr. Jubileer and a second from Ms. Goldman.
A motion to congratulate Mr. Patini for,
Yeah.
I could see the new dad in your eyes.
Oh, that's right. Ah, yes. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Yeah,
You look
thank you.
good, Dad.
Thanks.
Try to get some sleep.
Thanks. Do my best.
All right. All right. All those in favor? Okay. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.